All right, y'all. Can y'all handle Southern? Hey, yeah, good. Okay. Look, what we're going to do is we can descend into one of the issues out there, and when we pull the thread of it, we're going to see it's right at the center of the gospel. It's right at the center of some of the deepest wounds in our society. We're out to be healers. What's the invitation from Pope Francis? What's the church supposed to be? A little bastion, a little fortress where we come and we got the truth, and then we're going to go out and invite people to come in? A field hospital for the wounded where we go out. The invitation through Pope Francis, the invitation of the gospel. Jesus stayed on the road, always going out to the people, reaching out. The gospel of encounter. And Shell, I don't even know your real name. All I know him is, what's your principal's name? What you call him, Mr. what? Hanser. Oh, Mr. Hanser. Enhanced Mr. Hanser. As he said, every meeting, we never know the grace of what's going to happen in a meeting between two people. Like I met Sister Jean, and she's the one who got me here, and then there's all connections. So you've already seen the movie, right? So we're going to go in through the movie. First, I got to just tell you, I wrote a book. It came out in 1993. It's a book called Dead Man Walking. And nobody thought this book by a Catholic nun about the death penalty, where 80% of the whole United States was in favor of the death penalty. You do the polls, people say, yeah, I'm for the death penalty. And actually, it's the way I started out, too. I mean, people do these terrible crimes. Look at the poor victim. Look at the horror of what they did. Don't you think they deserve to die? You're going to tell me they respected the human rights of the person they just killed in cold blood, two teenage kids, as happened with the first man on death row that I visited. He and his brother in cold blood had shot two teenage kids who were coming home after a homecoming football game at their Catholic high school, shot them in cold blood, and there their bodies are left by the sugarcane field. And they left the kitchen of their parents alive and laughing, and Mom, I'll call you if I'm late, and just like you, just like your parents. And now these kids are dead. And so it's in all of our hearts to say, well, they deserve the death penalty. Look at what they did. And so when my book came out, here I am writing a book about two death row inmates I accompanied. Pat Saunier was the first. Robert Lee Willie was the second. Both of the crimes unspeakable. And here I am writing a death penalty about my journey, about the gospel of Jesus. And is this what, as a society, we want to do? So the book came out. It didn't have much chance of a success at all, just because of the national feeling. We were just beginning to enter into the discussion about the death penalty. And lo and behold, the film happens. If the film hadn't happened, you never would have heard of the book, and you never would have met the nun either, I can tell you that. I wouldn't be traveling the country and the world. And what I do is what we do as a community of faith, to share the journey of how I grew and my understanding of the gospel of Jesus, where it brought me, what I encountered, and what I learned. That's what we're going to do today, and I'm going to take you with me on the whole ride. So what was in the movie? What did you see in the movie? Well, there's a character, Matthew Poncelet. Here's a little bit about filmmaking. Everything I learned about filmmaking, I learned about Tim Robbins, who wrote that screenplay. Just a little bit of background, it was Susan Sarandon that made the film happen. Because here you have a book that comes out in 93. In 94, the paperback came out, and Susan Sarandon at the time was filming The Client in Memphis, one of the John Grisham movies. And her friend, Arlene Donovan, gave her the book, Dead Man Walking, to read. And that's the thing, if you ever write a book, you put it out there, and you just let God take that book, because you don't know where that book is going to go. Well, the book went into the lap of Susan Sarandon, who read the book all night, and then she's on the phone with me the next day, because she had to come to New Orleans to do the last bit of filming in an airport. And she said, Sister Helen, I want to meet you. I just read your book, And we need another kind of film on the death penalty in this country. Because all the other films that have been done on the death penalty, it was always following kind of like this little formula. And most of the movie was about, did he do it, did he not do it? Did she do it, did she not do it? Oh, okay, you're coming to the end of the film. Oh yeah, she's guilty, she did it. And the film ends with the execution. She's guilty, did a terrible crime, execution, justice done, film over, reflection over. And Susan Sarandon was the first to understand, and then Tim constructed this film that took you on a very deep journey. Because where did it take you in the film? So first of all, you see me, not knowing very much, going to visit this guy on death row after having written to him. And that whole book of Dead Man Walking and the whole film is about me discovering, because I don't know, I had never gotten involved with a death row inmate before. I didn't hang out with murderers. I was hanging out with kids like you, some of whom maybe have done murder, but we don't know it yet. We don't know yet what you did, but it will be discovered. You know that, about what you did. Anyway, so I'm hanging out with kids like you and people in the parish like Sister Jean over at the cathedral, the co-cathedral. And they'll go and meet this guy for the first time. And what Tim did in the movie, there were two people in the book, but he makes it into one character. Films. He said the first thing, the reason a film will never be like a book is because you got too many characters. There are two death row inmates, two sets of murder victims' families. You can't bring all those characters into a film. What we want to do is bring people into the essential journey. So what happens? You meet Matthew Poncelet. I meet Matthew Poncelet. Not a nice guy. He doesn't take responsibility for what he's done. He's denying what he did. He's given all these different versions. It wasn't me. It was the other guy did it and all that kind of stuff. And you sense you can't believe it, but you're not sure. And then where Tim takes us in the film is gradually just keep accompanying him, talking to him. So we're going to talk about two areas of the conflict. One is, here's the person who did the crime. We got him on death row, and the law says it's okay to kill him. In fact, as a society, this is what we want to do and need to do to protect the public. Because usually they get a bit demonized. It's like these people are evil. We can't put them in prison. They'll kill prison guards. They're evil. They love to kill. The only way we can be safe as a society is to kill them, and that's the death penalty. And if you've ever been to a death penalty trial and you hear the prosecutor doing that closing argument with the jurors, those 12 people just like us, and saying to them, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, and they usually turn their attention over to the victim's family and just say, look, if that mother and father sitting there, they're never going to see their child graduate from high school. They're never going to see their grandchildren. And ladies and gentlemen of the jury, now you're about to go make a decision about whether or not this person who killed their children in cold blood should live or die. And stiffen your spine and do justice for this family. And what are they saying is justice for the victim's family? He deserves to be killed, and we're going to invite him into the execution when it happens, and they get to sit on the front row, and they get to watch. And justice will be done. And anything short of death for him or her is not justice. He killed, he died. That's pretty straightforward, huh? And then sometimes you throw in some Bible quotes. As the Lord has said, those that shed blood will have their blood shed. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. You kill, you're killed. It's justice, simple justice, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. So deliver for this family justice and come back with a death penalty. And juries do different things, because you see, it only takes one person in those 12 people. If it's not unanimous and everybody says death, 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 all 12, the person's going to live. And when those jurors go back behind those closed doors to make that decision, there are a lot of stories that happen there between human beings. I know one juror who, the case was Robert Sawyer in Louisiana, and Robert had mental problems, and you can look at him and you can see he was off. You really could. And this juror, his struggle was Robert Sawyer, who had done the murders, he's about to be executed in Louisiana, and the juror said, well, when we went in for the sentencing part to decide life or death, he said, I thought it was going to be like, a democratic process. We all sit around, everybody said, well, what do you think? What do you think? And you could just talk to each other. So he said, the foreman of the jury gets us back there and said, well, look, we can have like a little straw vote, a little leaning, see what we're dealing with here, if we already have a unanimous decision or not. So he said, I'm sitting there, and so they start going around. Death, 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 and they come to me. And I say, hey, who are we to sentence somebody to die? I don't feel like he's going to be in prison. We're going to be safe. And he said, sister, they came down on me like, well, there's a Southern expression. I'm going to say gravy on rice, but there's another expression that he actually used in the heat of the moment, which you can fill in for yourself. So it wasn't the nun who said it, you filled it in your own mind. But the pressure, he said, pressure, they were all on me and saying, man, we gotta give this guy a death sentence. And he said, I held out, and then I just caved in. They were all, and I go, well, maybe I am wrong, if all of them believe this. And he caved in. And the night Robert Sawyer was executed in Louisiana, I call him the anguished juror in the book. It's in my second book, The Death of Innocence. He was drunk, and he called the lawyer, Nick Trinacosta, the night that Robert Sawyer was executed. And he's crying, and he's saying, Nick, I tell my son, don't ever cave in. Do what you know to be right. Because more and more had come out about Robert Sawyer's mental illness. And they were going to execute a man who was mentally ill, granted, who had done a terrible crime, but hey, so you're going to execute people that are mentally ill even though they've done a terrible crime? I mean, and what this is all about is us as a society. People do unspeakable crimes. The death penalty is a choice we make about what we as a society are going to do. So Tim was explaining to me that what you want to do when you do a film is there's a difference between art and propaganda. In propaganda, I'm against the death penalty, so we're going to stack the film and shape it in a way. The only way you can come out in this film is to be against the death penalty. But when you do art, you bring people over equally to both sides of the moral issue. So let's say if we were the family, if we were the victim's family, what would we want? But then on the other side, if we were the one who had done the murder, but also he has a mother, he has brothers, and what are they going through because they are the brother of the one who did the terrible murder? What happens to the kids at school when they go to school? And the taunting of the other kids or throwing dead animals in their locker at school. You're the brother of a murderer. Your brother is evil, and you must be too, because you're in the family with somebody who did that terrible thing. What happens to that family? The suffering on both sides. And real art is going to take you over to both sides. And real descending into moral issues as a Catholic who wants to be true to the gospel of Christ, we are going to descend equally into both sides too, on any moral issue. So if you take the issue of abortion, if you take the issue of gun rights, take any issue, we want to go equally over to both sides to hear the arguments and hear the cries on both sides. And then, in the light of the gospel, and in the light of a community of people, because we don't make these decisions on our own. We're not a bunch of lone rangers. Well, I'm going to make a decision here, it's going to be morally good, and then I'm going to follow it. We belong to families. We belong to communities. We belong to parishes. That's the gift of the body of Christ, is we're in community. And in this school, you got a community. Because you're in classes, you're learning together, but it's also the spirit you can feel in this school. And I'm going to tell you, and I've been in a lot of schools, you feel as soon as you walk in the door. And meet that man who's your principal. Meet Mike. Don't know Mike well, but I know he teaches some of you. That guy over there smiling with his arms folded. And each other, you're part of a community. So let me tell you what happened to me. And the film captures it because it brings you over to both sides. And you remember how the film ends. What happens to Matthew Poncelet in the end? He confesses, he breaks down, he cries, he admits, he killed the boy, and he's going to be executed. And he is. And you witness execution. And here was the brave thing Tim did. Here's what was bold in what he did with Dead Man Walking that changed the way death penalty films were done in the United States and around the world. Because he shows Matthew Poncelet being executed, so there's a part of our hearts that go, well, look at what he did. This is what the death penalty is about. Now he pays for what he did, right? And then at the same time, but we've also been with Matthew Poncelet, confessing, being sorry. We've met his humanness. And then he shows us the murder out in the woods, in cold blood, the boy and the girl. And you see Matthew Poncelet raping the girl. You see Matthew Poncelet with the gun in his hands, participating in the murder. And Tim shows those two scenes side by side. And the editing committee that was working with him said, Tim, no, just in the film with the execution of Matthew Poncelet, because he's confessed what he did, he's remorseful, and he's executed. You have the audience. He said, I don't want to have the audience. They said, don't show the murder again. Don't show the crime again. And Tim says, no, I don't want to have the audience. And then he shows side by side Matthew Poncelet stretched out on the gurney, being executed, and then there's the couple murdered out in the woods. Aerial view. I was there for the filming that night. I remember this. And there we have it. And here we, as a people, as a society, say, he did that crime, so what do? It's about us. In Montana, it's about us. Because you have a statute on the books that says we will decide there's some murders in which people deserve to die. What I've learned over the years, what I learned when I wrote Dead Man Walking, when I wrote the book after it, Death of Innocence, is the theory of the death penalty may be one thing. Oh yeah, we're going to reserve the death penalty for those who do the worst of the worst crimes. How do we define what's the worst of the worst? Anybody who has somebody killed in their family is going to say, well, that's the worst of the worst. That was my mama, or that was my brother, or that was my aunt. Anytime a human being is killed, and this unique life that can never be replaced because we created that way by God is taken out of the universe as we know it, isn't that always the worst of the worst? The way this planet's dying right now, and every 20 minutes another species disappears, can never be replaced, isn't that the worst of the worst? How do we define what the worst of the worst is? So Montana has done what Louisiana has done, what the 31 states that have done, still have the death penalty. You go to your legislature and you say, so define in Montana what's going to be the worst of the worst. And so usually this list comes out where it has to be defined, because to have law you have to have definitions. And so it usually comes out, well, anybody who does cold-blooded, intention, murder without regard for human life, well, okay. And then, well, are there some citizens, when their life is taken, that would be a death penalty because their life is so highly prized by us? And almost everybody, you know what they put first on that list? If you kill a policeman. Yeah, because policemen are defending us, right? They're risking their lives for us. So policemen. And then you get into the debate. Well, what about if you kill a fireman? They risk their lives for us. What about a public school teacher? What about a public health nurse? Nope, we got to cut it off somewhere, so we'll just say policeman. Or what about this? Well, if you kill a child, that's the worst of the worst. So you put on the list, if you kill a child in Montana, you get the death penalty. And so here's the debate going on in the legislature, and here are these parents coming in the legislative debate to say, our son, Peter, was killed, but he happened to be 14 years old, and the law defines child is you got to be 12 or under. Are you saying our son, our beloved son, Peter, because he happened to be 14, is not worth the death penalty? How can you say that? And what you come up against is, as human beings, we are frail and imperfect, and we try to make our categories and try to make it work. Now, I want you to step back. At 30 years of practice now that we've been doing the death penalty in the United States, and we have the theory, the worst of the worst, and the way states define it, and then we look at who actually now in Montana, in Arkansas, in Louisiana, and all across, how have we actually enforced what we mean by worst of the worst? And you find a certain profile. First of all, always poor people. Never people, no matter what crime they do, if they can get good defense, and that prosecution knows that he or she is up against a crackerjack defense that's going to fight him every inch of the way and do pretrial motions and get in there to get their forensic evidence tested, and they still might lose, will be 150%, 80% more inclined to make a plea bargain and just say, okay, if your client says your client's guilty, we won't go to trial, and they get a life sentence. A lot of bargaining goes on in the criminal justice system. 95% of criminal cases never go to trial. They're settled in deals between the prosecutor and the defense attorney. So the first thing we learn in this profile of actual practice is that it's always poor people who are selected for the death penalty. And what happens with being poor? It has a lot to do with what kind of defense you get. Because you see, the trial system is set up that you can have an adversarial system of coming to truth. Prosecution presents, defense presents. Prosecution gives the scenario of the crime, and the motive, and the evidence. Defense presents alternative narrative, and then independent testing on the evidence. And what's supposed to happen during trials, it's called discovery. In discovery, the prosecution is supposed to turn over to defense anything that shows up that points to the possible innocence of the defendant. So, for example, the original police report that came in to show there always was another suspect. But what happens with human beings under pressure, and this is all of us, when we're under pressure, and prosecutors can get under pressure. Maybe it's been a terrible crime, the whole community knows about it, there's been a lot of media about it, and the pressure on them was, here comes a likely suspect, let's go after him. Well, the police report shows there was another suspect, let's not complicate it. And they have control of that, and they don't always give it to the defense. And when they're under pressure and they have the spotlight, we're going after this person, they bury it. Sometimes they can bury DNA evidence that contradicts that this person absolutely was the one who raped and killed that person, and they got DNA evidence that shows that it was, in fact, somebody else. And we now have 151 people that have managed to get off a death row in the United States because it was found out that prosecutors manipulated evidence and did not turn it over. 90% of the people wrongfully put on death row happened because prosecutors got under pressure, then held back the other evidence and said, no, 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 it was him, it had to be him, only him. And they lied, or they hid evidence, because they're human too. And they don't want this to come out. They publicly went for the death penalty. So what's a profile show? 30 years? First of all, it's all poor people, and the big difference it makes for you when you're poor is the kind of defense you get. You get good defense no matter what you've done, and you are not going to go to death row. Chances are they'll make a deal because they don't want to be up against what the defense is going to do. The second thing we've learned is the huge, huge racism that's in the death penalty. So we go, okay, we know as a nation we're trying to deal with the whole issue of race in a way we never have before. And it started when we had a black president. We had never had a black president. Boy, the issues of race all over the place when Obama was president. But it's still with us because we have a rise in neo-Nazi, just white superior, all kinds of stuff, all kinds of issues are hitting us today. You're lucky to be living at this time. It's a good time to be alive because some of the great issues of our day are really present before us. So how does racism show itself in the death penalty? Go on death row. Man, you're not going to find a whole lot of people of color on death row in Montana. You're not going to find many people on death row at all in Montana, in fact. You haven't had an execution in years and years and years. You got the death penalty on the books, but you're not really executing people like Texas is. Do you really have a death penalty that's workable, that you're using the death penalty? Or you think maybe it's a political symbol that people are using? So where does race show up? Overwhelmingly 8 out of 10 people that are on death row now and have ever been executed killed white people. It ends up that the status of who was killed and who cares about who was killed, who cares about their life and identifies with them, is one of the main things. Like in New Orleans, 90% of the people killed are people of color, but yet the prosecutor in New Orleans seldom ever goes for the death penalty for a person of color. And in New Orleans, it's going to be black people, but in New Mexico or in Arizona, it's going to be Latinas, it's going to be Hispanics, just people not white. And we got all kinds of stuff going on in this country now about what it means to be a full citizen and whether or not race makes a difference. Now, one of the things about being in Montana is mostly white people. I mean, I come from Louisiana every summer to write. I mean, I see this big difference, man. If I meet 3 black people while I'm here in Montana, I mean, that's a lot. Just simply because it's the way the population has been, just who you are. Who are the people you sitting in here with here right now? It's not many people of color that different from you. That's good. But on the other hand, you want a full education to know that you need to get inside other people's skin and know what they go through. You happen to go to a good school, that hopefully you have experiences where you get inside the life and skin of people different from you, look different from you, come from a culture different from you. Because that's the secret of being America, is if we can do that together. That's also the heart of the gospel of Jesus and to be the body of Christ, that we can have different people and we know how to have compassion and empathy to be a body together. So what have we learned about the death penalty? We learned that it's almost always when you kill a white person, but not when you kill a person of color. And this is in the actual practice. And we also learn it's only poor people. And there's another thing we've learned about the practice of the death penalty. We're finding that in the Deep South that practiced slavery and had the most lynchings and firebombing of people, where the Ku Klux Klan was most operative. If you want to talk to people about terrorism and what happened to them, talk to African Americans and their experience in this country. Because the sheriff's department would look the other way when Klan people are lynching people, when they're firebombing people's homes, when they're firebombing churches and killing people. They look the other way. Nobody was ever brought to justice for what the Klan was doing to African American people. So the reason that you can call it terror is because African American people knew they weren't going to have law enforcement defending them. There was not going to be a court trial for the people who were killing them, shooting them, lynching them. That there was no justice, that you could look to the law. And that's been their experience. And then when you look at an application of the death penalty, you just see overwhelmingly it's when you kill whites. I had to figure all this out. I didn't know any of this. I started out not knowing anything about the death penalty. But I had the encounter. 6 human beings I've accompanied to execution. And what I've learned about the cases. In most of the instances, people on death row really are guilty of what they've done. And then the moral issue, as is clear in the film, A Dead Man Walking, Tim Robbins, the first thing he said when we went to do this film, and we worked on every line, every scene of this film. A lot of authors are mad with what people do in films about their book. But I got to work with Tim and then with Susan Sarandon and Sean Penn. And he said, this is not going to be a film about somebody who's innocent. We know we shouldn't execute innocent people. But what when they're guilty? So this is going to be a person who's really guilty of a terrible crime, and we're not going to like him because he's not going to be remorseful. So can we kill him? Can't we kill him? Can't we justify it to ourselves? And that's a moral issue. And see, it's a bold film because it takes you over to both sides. I learned a lot when I was writing the book of Dead Man Walking, and I had a really good editor who helped me really be honest, because I made a bad mistake. One of the bad mistakes I made. I didn't know what to do with the victim's family. Everybody was Catholic in this. Pat and Eddie Saunier, who did the murders, were Catholic. The Bourques, who lost their daughter Loretta, 18, in the murder, they were Catholic. The LeBlancs, who lost David, their son, just 17, they were Catholic. Me, a nun, I'm Catholic. And I didn't know what to do with them because the victims' families were always so angry. And the prosecutors are saying to them, anybody who's against the death penalty is not your friend. They're your enemy, and they put you on a seesaw. And every time I'd see victims' families on the news, you saw them, some of them having their own press conference saying, we can't wait to see this person executed. Well, you know, I cut them a whole lot of slack because they're in trauma, they're in grief and loss, they've lost their child, they're angry, and they're saying they want the death of the person who killed. I'm go, hey, if somebody killed my mother, I'm not going to just automatically say, oh yeah, no, they shouldn't get the death penalty because I learned that, our emotions take us to this place of outrage, and we want to see justice. And it's the starting point of almost everyone. But I thought to myself, how am I going to approach these people? I'm now the spiritual advisor to the people who kill their children. What am I going to say to them? I don't want to get into it with them where they say, well, sister, you care about us and you care about our child? Well, we're going to be on that front row watching the execution. You going to be there with us, sister? You believe in justice for our dead child? What would I say? Because in my own conscience and in my own heart, I know that's not what the gospel of Jesus tells me, and that I'd just be caving in to just say, oh, yeah, I believe in the death penalty. I couldn't do that. And I stayed away from them. And in the book of Dead Man Walking, where my editor, Jason Epstein, and when he looked at the first draft of the book, and he just said, well, Helen, you wait. And then when you come, you don't reach out to the victim's family, you don't write them a note, you don't visit them, you don't do anything. It was a terrible mistake, and you're kind of gliding over it in this, the way you're talking about it, you're just saying, well, I'd never done this before. He said, you can't let yourself get off so easy. He said, it was cowardice, wasn't it? You were scared, weren't you? I go, well, yeah. He said, put that in the book. Admit that you were scared. Admit that it was cowardice. Because then people reading your book are going to believe you. But when you try to just take them with you on the peaks of the waves where you did everything great and you don't admit your mistakes, they're going to go, wait, she's not being honest with us. She's only taking us on the bright side of things. She can't stand in outrage at this horror. And she's just being all, well, the murderer has human rights and all that. Christ told us to do this and all that. She's not angry and in outrage like those poor families. And so he was right. And so I went back and redid it and acknowledged my mistake of not reaching out. Then this amazing thing happened. He couldn't bring it out very strongly in the film because you'd taken people over to both sides of this issue. But what really happened to me, and this is in the book, when I did meet the victims' families of these two teenagers who murdered, it was at the worst time. It was at a pardon board hearing, the last legal step before a person's executed. So the brother, Eddie Saunier, got a life sentence, but Pat Saunier, the first person I was with on death row, this is his pardon board, and you have a public meeting, and you sign a book when you go in, you say what side you're on, and you say before the pardon board whether or not you think a person ought to live or die. And all the victims' families are there with their relatives and their friends, and they have packed the room, and I'm there with one lawyer and one psychiatrist, just three of us, saying to the pardon board, don't kill Patrick Saunier. And that's when I met the victims' family. How could they not but see me as an enemy? It's the first time they're meeting me. And that anger comes out in the film. You meet the anger in Earl Delacroix and the Percys. Yeah, where were you? We didn't get a crumb from you. You'd just been with the murderers. And in real life, what happened is that we were walking outside while a pardon board was voting, and I rounded a corner, and the two families were walking toward me on the sidewalk, and we ran right into each other. And the Bourques, who had lost their daughter, were the first, and they looked at me, and they were furious at me, and they just averted their gaze and walked by me in silence. And right behind me were the boys' parents, David, this kid everybody loved. He was 17, and they walked right up to me. Lloyd LeBlanc and his wife, Eula, and he walked right up to me and he said, Sister, all this time you've been visiting those two brothers, and you never once came to see us. Sister, you can't believe the pressure we're under with this death penalty thing. I was so taken aback, and you never know where grace is going to come in encounters. And I said, Mr. LeBlanc, I'm so sorry. I didn't think you wanted to see me. He said, Sister, you don't know what I think till you come see me and we talk. He said, I pray in this little chapel. Would you come pray with me? I said, sure, Mr. LeBlanc. And it's one of the beautiful practices Catholics have. We have a lot of way of praying. And one is to keep vigil, to keep a holy hour in the presence of the Blessed Sacrament. And he kept a holy hour on Friday mornings from 4 to 5 in the morning. In St. Martin of Tours, this little country church. And that man's inviting me to come pray with him, and that's an invitation I'm not going to turn down. So there I am kneeling by the side of Lloyd LeBlanc. We are praying the rosary together on a Friday morning, and the way the mysteries of the rosary of the life of Christ on Fridays, the day in which Christ died, is the sorrowful mysteries. And I'm kneeling alongside a Father who, with the agony of Christ before his death, trying to face death and his crucifixion and his death, is praying through the agony of his Son before he died and his death. And he is beginning to teach me, first in our prayer together and then later with what he shared, what it is like to lose someone you love to violence and then to work his way with God's grace into forgiveness. And here was the big revelation. He said, Sister, people think forgiveness is weak. Like, oh, you kill my son, I forgive you, so therefore I'm condoning. You kill my son, it's okay, I'll forgive you. Forgiveness means it's okay. Forgiveness means I'm condoning what you did. And he said, here's my experience. When they killed David, all I wanted to do, as soon as my feet would hit the floor in the morning, was kill those two brothers with my own hands because of what they killed David, and I almost lost my wife, Eula. She was in such grief. We even had to move David's grave. We had buried him in a family plot in another town, and we had to move his body to a cemetery because Eula can't make it through a day without going to the cemetery and being with David to get through her day. And I'd wake up at 2 in the morning, I'd feel over on her side of the bed. She's not there. She's in the kitchen crying. She's in the bathroom crying. He said our house was a morgue. They plunged our family into such sorrow. How could I but not want to kill them with my own bare hands? But then he said, I discovered, it's like I was angry all the time. I was angry. And now I'm snapping at Eula, our daughter Vicky. I'm angry with them. I'm just not myself, because I was always a kind person. I love to help people. That's who I am. And I was losing it. And then when he was telling me this, then he put his hand out like that. And then I said, They killed our son, but I'm not going to let them kill me. I'm going to do what Jesus said. He was the first victim's family I met that taught me that forgiveness, forgive, look at the word, to give before, was saving his own life. It was not succumbing to the anger and the vengeance that would make him become a hateful person, that the love in him, that his identity as a kind and loving person was not overcome by the evil. And with the grace of God, he made it through, that he remained a kind and loving person. And the most amazing thing, Mrs. Saunier, the mother, think of this, in this little town of St. Martinville, here she had 2 of her sons who had committed this unspeakable murder against these teenage kids. She couldn't even go in the grocery store in St. Martinville because she'd overhear people saying, there she is. That's the mother of the murderers. What's she doing in here? And the hatred of the town is visited on her. So when we legalize that we can kill a person for a crime, that hatred doesn't stop like in a little bubble just around the person. Their mamas in there, their brothers are in there, their siblings are in there, and people were cutting up dead animals and throwing them on the front porch of Mrs. Saunier. And teenagers were driving around in their cars at night at her house and yelling through the window, mother of the murderer, mother of the murderer, yeah, mother of the murderer. So she disconnected her phone, she cut off her TV, she closed her blinds and lived like a little hermit, just trying to make it through as the days approached for the execution of one of the brothers. And one day, she hears somebody on a front porch, and she opened the blinds, looked very carefully, could see there was a man standing there. He had something in his hands, and she looks really carefully and opens up her front door. And that man was Lloyd LeBlanc, the father of David. And what's in his hands? He has a basket of fruit, and he hands it to her. And he said, here, Miss Saunier, I know you've been having a tough time in this town. He said, look, I'm a parent like you. As parents, we never really know what our kids might do. I don't hold you responsible that your boys killed our son. He said, and here's my phone number. If you need me, you call me. We are blessed to have among us witnesses that rise up and show us what the gospel of Jesus is about, and victims' families. Many of them are showing us that. Or when we meet them, if in their anger they get before the TV cameras and say, I want to see this person die, can we understand that they are in trauma and grief and in the first stages of trying to work through that they have lost someone whom they loved and will never look at their face on the earth again? Can we understand that it's going to be a whole journey? And then in our own hearts, where do we go? So we have victims' families now that are rising up to be witnesses for us. When New Jersey, the state of New Jersey, 10 years ago, when it was before their legislature to repeal the death penalty, and as is going to come up in this state, because you don't have a real practicing death penalty. You got some people, a few on death row, but you're not serious about carrying out execution. It's going to rise before your legislature. And it's going to be the voice of the people saying to the legislators, we don't need to do this. We can be safe without killing people. because this is us doing it. And so when it happened in New Jersey, 62 murder victims' families testified before the legislature of New Jersey saying, don't kill for us. And this is how they put it. They said, so okay, you give the death penalty. What happens to us? We start waiting. We're in this holding pattern. We're promised. Now at the end of this, we're going to get to come and we're going to get to watch as this person's executed. We wait 10 years, 15 years, sometimes 20 years. Waiting. How do we begin to heal? How do we move on in our lives to pay attention to our other children, to get on with it? We're waiting for this moment. And think about this. Suppose you do execute a person in Montana. And you picture that family that's waited all this time. Now they're going to sit on the front row. And they're going to watch as the people of Montana, as the law, that person's going to be executed by whatever method they choose here with lethal injection, some concoction of drugs. They have to experiment, see what works. And they get to watch the killing. Can watching a violent act, even though it's legal, can that heal a human heart? As Bud Welch, whose daughter Julie was killed in Oklahoma City bombing, Timothy McVeigh bombing 20 years ago, he said, even if I'd watched Timothy McVeigh be executed over closed-circuit television, when I would come home afterwards, the chair that our Julie used to sit in would still be empty. We can never replace a human life with the death of another human life. Think about it. We need you, the young people, to be bringing us into a different future in this country. We have tried to settle a lot of social problems by using violence. The death penalty is the epitome of that. We got social problems here, we got violence. What we're going to do is we're going to select the most violent people and we're going to kill them. And that's going to be the thing that's going to make us a nonviolent society. Is it? Is it? And now, I am so heartened by the leadership of young people in this country coming out of Parkland, Florida. Because, see, they've been in the fire. They've had their friends shot and killed near them. They know about all the drills. Gunmen in the school, alarm goes off, everybody seek a place of safety. They've been through drills that schools are no longer safe places. And they are standing up to the leaders of the country. Look at all the things that have appeared on YouTube. And they have very reasonable requests, and they are introducing another conversation about guns. And they didn't go and take away everybody's guns. Nobody can have guns to hunt. Nobody can have guns. Nuh-uh. They're drawing a line. No assault rifles. And if you use the rationale that we can have a gun to defend our family, okay. But an assault rifle, which is a military weapon, because they had no defense of just repeated fire coming from an assault weapon of a very mentally ill kid. That killed them. Killed Joe, whom they knew, and Phil, whom they knew, and Betty, whom they knew. It's like people coming back from war who had their buddy shot, and then they re-enlist to go back because they owe it to their buddy, their friend who was killed. And they are standing up, and they are leading us in another conversation. And here, on March 24th, here in Billings, there's going to be a march in solidarity with what's going on across the nation. Not asking for the end of guns, but the end of assault weapons. And for the legislators, the leaders, the statesmen, to be able to have the courage to stand up with the people. That the question of guns is a public health issue. It's not just an individual issue of I ought to be able to defend myself and my family. We have to look at that. We got more restrictions on baby carriages and just health things around things like that than we have around guns. So when the argument's given to us, hey, wait, this is against the Second Amendment, our individual right. Yeah, okay. Everybody's got an individual right to a gun. But assault weapons? How can you call that self-defense? And we need to take it. We had banned them for a while, but then legislators caved in because the NRA has a lot of lobbying power. It puts a lot of money into political campaigns. That's a fact, and you can check that out. So what are we doing on March 24th at the courthouse steps at 10 o'clock in the morning? I'm going to be there in solidarity with people saying we need new gun laws, at least to stop assault weapons, that's not good for the public health of the people. And who's leading it? The young people. The young people are leading it. So never think that because you're a kid that you can't make a real difference in the moral conversation that goes on in this country around any issue. But you got to know your stuff. You got to dig into it. You can't just get on a bandwagon and go along. You got to know. You got to get your information. And you got to know where your heart and your conscience is. And then stand up. When you read about the prophets, Jeremiah, Isaiah, standing up in a society, calling people to be a more moral society, to be a more loving and compassionate society. That's us. That's us, and these are our times, and these issues are rising up. It's a joy to talk to you today, and you know what? I think this may be the best audience that I have ever talked to. So thanks for letting me be here today.